Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Your Gadget Guide. Now today we're going to be putting two of the top mobile operating systems against each other. Android, Ice Cream Sandwich, and iOS 5.
It's been 4 years since the launch of iOS, and 3 years since Android started competing with it. The time for excuses is now over.
Now, recent statistics show that Android has 700,000 activations each day, compared to iOS's 400,000 each day. I bet you're wondering why Android is so far in the lead. Android isn't as far ahead as you may think.
You're probably wondering what the connotations are of this image behind me. As you can see, I have a lot of Android robots behind me because there's a lot of Android phones. Android is an open source platform you and I can both make hardware for. If you can make the hardware, with Android being open source, you can put Android on your own phone, providing you'd made the phone, obviously. Now, what's that going to mean? Well, the fact that anybody can develop Android, that gives these Chinese companies, the smaller companies, to make lower end mobile phones and put Android on it. What's that doing for Google? That's raising their activations each time one of these phones are sold. That's very clever because that makes Android activations seem very, very high. But the truth is, half of them phones are pretty low spec. Now, Apple on the other hand, they say no. Only Apple can make hardware for their iOS software. Why have they done that? Well, it's simple, play it safe. Apple know their own software more than anybody else. So by that, they can develop the right hardware with the right specifications to make sure you get the best experience with your device.
None of that gibberish would matter to the average consumer. What would matter was the user interface of the operating system. One thing I'll say about iOS, it has that boring user interface that you can't customize. Android, on the other hand, you can customize it as much as you want. In fact, you don't even have to call it Android, you can call it your very own operating system. Despite the heart of it being Android, you can make it pretty much unrecognizable. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, iOS also becomes more stale than cheese. It's just cheese doesn't last as long. I've never been a great fan of Android, but with the newly released Ice Cream Sandwich on the Galaxy Nexus, my opinions have changed. I'm absolutely loving how fluent this operating system is compared to the older generations. Even these small touch-ups, for example the fancy animations and the gorgeous font use, adds to a better experience. Not to mention new features such as Face Unlock. Sure, iOS 5 has new features too, however most of them aren't visible, and the only visible features that are new are pretty much stolen from Android anyway. Sure, there's fancy animations in iOS, it's just that they haven't changed in the past 4 years. It doesn't take a genius to work out that the user interface is a lot better in Ice Cream Sandwich.
So there you have it. Ice Cream Sandwich has the better user interface. Now let's break it down and take a look at the individual keyboards.
The default keyboard in Ice Cream Sandwich isn't great, but it's not bad. You can definitely write text messages on it and emails. However, you're probably going to want to customize it, which you have the ability to do, unlike iOS. If your Android device has an accelerometer, you might want to turn the device around and type in landscape mode. It makes the keyboard a little bit bigger, there's more room to type, and the overall experience just feels a lot better. Or, if you're lazy like me, use the built-in speech-to-text. I like turtles, they're very cute, just like me. It works okay, but seriously, don't expect anything that you could write an essay on. Or should I say, talk an essay on. I will have to say, I really do like the keyboard within iOS. You can't customize it, but you can certainly type fast, despite being a touchscreen. Unlike Android, you don't have to worry about your device having a built-in accelerometer, because it's not going to be made by a cheap company that's just trying to get your money. With Apple designing your devices, they know what the operating system requires. And if you're lazy, feel free to use Siri, it works better than speech to text. I'm hungry, can I get some pizza? I'm gonna have to give the best keyboard to iOS.
So there you have it, one apiece. Maybe Ice Cream Sandwich and iOS 5 are a lot closer than we first thought. But now it's time to take a look at the navigation side of things. And when I say navigation, I don't mean GPS, I mean finding your way around the operating systems.
Navigation within iOS is pretty much boring, simple, but one thing I will say, you could give it to somebody of any age and they'd pretty much know how to use it. Just like all Apple products, iOS is pretty much easy to use. Android's center of attention is pretty much the dock at the bottom. Dock? I'm sure something else uses a dock as its main navigation point. Apart from that, everything else is pretty much like iOS, icon based with fancy animations. What really does separate Android and iOS is the widgets on the home screen, something that iOS really could do with. iOS has its own search feature, so I can search the iPhone. If no results are found, I can search the web or search Wikipedia. Android has its own search feature, however, this allows you to search Google. Although it doesn't state, you can actually search for features on the phone via this search bar.
We have come to the agreement that both operating systems have very good navigation, therefore this round is a draw. Now we're going to take a look inside the web browsing side of things in the ice cream sandwich and also iOS 5.
Any single smartphone operating system, whether it's Android, iOS, WebOS or Windows Phone 7, the web browser is extremely important on this device, simply because with it being a smartphone, business is mainly the focus. I do have to say the web browser in Ice Cream Sandwich is very enjoyable to use. I'm not sure whether that's just because of the bigger screen, but I really like it. I'm pretty impressed by the options that you have within Ice Cream Sandwich's web browser. For some reason, I feel like Ice Cream Sandwich is a little bit more interactive. I can also say Ice Cream Sandwich isn't short of options and features. Okay, I admit it, I enjoy using Ice Cream Sandwich web browser more than iOS. iOS is also featureful and user-friendly. However, like I say, it becomes very stale. Things just aren't as good looking as Ice Cream Sandwich. The thing that iOS always will have is the fact that anybody can use it, and that is pretty much very important, more important than how it looks. iOS 5's web browser isn't bad, it's just the fact that it looks a little bit out of date. It performs very well. I just really do think that it looks a little bit old. It really could do with a redesign. Apple, redesign it, please. It's boring.
So there we have it. Android take the lead 2-1. Now it's time to take a look at the availability and the fragmentation.
Many people get confused by the name fragmentation. I'm going to show you an example. Right, take this as an example. Here are 4 Android robots with different colours. Let's pretend each one of them is a different phone running a different version of Android. There you go. There is your fragmentation. Fragmentation is basically a number of devices with a number of different operating systems. Even today, I could walk into a retailer's and buy an Android device that's 2 operating systems out of date. Okay, well maybe not today because the shops are closed, but you get the hint. iOS on the other hand, well, that's not the case. There's only 3 devices that run iOS: iPhone, iPad, and of course, iPod. Every single phone, tablet, and media device that Apple stock will have the latest operating system. If it doesn't, you can certainly download it via iTunes.
So there we have it. Availability and fragmentation summed up in one. I'm now going to send an email to... Email! Let's check out emailing on Ice Cream Sandwich and iOS 5.
Email, one of the most important things in a smartphone operating system. Let's take a look at how it works on both Ice Cream Sandwich and iOS 5. Both of the operating systems display emails in a very similar way. It's pretty easy to understand and it's pretty easy to search for emails if we used to lose one. iOS has always been caught out when it comes to email. It's never really had a really strong email application. The built-in mail client isn't that great. It does work, but I would definitely say writing an email and generally reading emails feels a lot better within Ice Cream Sandwich. Once again, I'd just like to emphasize, just because I prefer Ice Cream Sandwich for email, it doesn't mean that iOS isn't usable. iOS is still an absolute brilliant platform for email, it's just that Ice Cream Sandwich is a little bit better. I'd have to say the strongest point in Ice Cream Sandwich's email client is the amount of options that you have. I was overly impressed by the options and the settings that I had within my email client. iOS 5 on the other hand, well, what can I say? I'm incredibly impressed at the way it handles multiple email accounts. Nice one, iOS.
So, you must be thinking there is only one winner, right? Well, actually that is where you're wrong, because Android Ice Cream Sandwich and iOS 5 are as good as each other in different ways. If you don't mind limitations, go for iOS 5, but if you don't mind fragmentation, go for Android Ice Cream Sandwich. If you don't like either of them, you always have the Windows Phone 7, and if you don't like Windows Phone 7, well, there's always the Nokia 3210. From Darren and Carl, this is your Gadget Guide.